Hi, this is Diane, and welcome to DMD Digest. Today I'm going to be talking about different types of digestive conditions, but primarily focusing on some foods that can worsen our heartburn or GERD symptoms if you've been diagnosed, and another classification of foods that are called FODMAPs. And FODMAP actually is an acronym, and it's much easier to say the acronym than to actually say what this entails. But to let you know, FODMAP simply means fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And when you put all that together, it kind of spells FODMAP. So what are those? Well, they're actually types of sugars that are found in a lot of different foods, and actually a lot of carbohydrates, not only fruit and vegetables, but also our rice, flour, barley, things of that nature. And cheeses, dairy, actually pretty much every food, come to think of it, has some type of sugar in it. So I'm going to be talking about that today and explaining a bit. And as many of you know, on a personal note, I suffer a lot with digestive and intestinal issues and the whole gas, bloating, heartburn, you name it. So I've done a lot of research and kind of looking into this on my own. And I think one of the things that gets really confusing is people who have been diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, or maybe even a celiac disease or something else of that nature, SIBO, anything involving your stomach and your intestines. A lot of times our first thought is, oh, well, I must have a gluten sensitivity or a gluten intolerance, or I must be lactose intolerant. And as I've done some videos in the past, kind of pointing out some specifics about that, that very well may be the case. I found kind of for myself that through a process of restricting certain foods, eliminating categories, and just trial and error, what I decided to try was a low FODMAP diet. So I kind of had to do some research on my own. Unfortunately for me, the majority of foods that I actually like and tend to go toward are complex carbohydrates, lots of raw fruit, vegetables, grains, things like that, and come to find out those are actually not very good. So I've had some pretty good success by trying to stick on a low FODMAP diet. So I'm going to go through a list of certain foods that are ones to be more cautious of, and ones that are okay. Once again, a lot of this, like I said, is based on my own experiences. You really need to experiment on your own. And as always, when you're trying to eliminate a certain food or group, try to just limit by one thing at a time, so you're not making too many changes, because then you're really not going to know. And then again, everyone varies to an extent. So some of you may be able to tolerate a larger serving than others. Some people may find, on some of these foods that I'm listing that, well, you said that, this food I needed to be super careful with, but I'm perfectly fine if I eat that. Well, awesome. Good for you is what I would say. The more complex and the more variety you have, the better and the more fortunate you are. So, with that being said, I know I also mentioned some things about heartburn, and we've always tend to believe and understood that heartburn came because we had too much acid in our diet, or our stomachs were producing too much acid, or something was happening along that line. And come to find out, the more research that's been done about it actually shows that it isn't about too much acid in your stomach. There are some other factors associated with it, but a lot of it has to do with with body dynamics, your size, and what you're doing after you eat. Certain foods can provoke it, but it's not necessarily about low acid. Actually, when you introduce higher acidic foods, it can relieve those symptoms of heartburn. Not everyone can tolerate that though. So obviously be cautious still with really strong citrusy fruits like lemons, limes, grapefruits. Some people really struggle with oranges, tomato-based products as well, in addition to spiciness. But let's move on to some of the foods that I'm identifying as low FODMAP and some things to watch and be careful about. I mentioned that FODMAP stand for fermented foods. And if you've listened to some of these videos in the past, you know that like fermented foods, I'm talking about different like dairy, such as yogurt, kefir. Wine is actually a fermented food. Vinegars are fermented. Cheeses are also fermented, as well as our sauerkraut, kimchi, cabbage related type foods. Some of those you're going to be able to tolerate, some of them you are not. And I'm not going to go into every single food group because that would be several hours of you listening to me talk about every single food group, which would be beyond boring for you. So let me just hit on a few things. So in talking about fruits, some things that are higher FODMAP, which would be cautious with these, or if you do eat them, try to eat them in smaller amounts. For one would be watermelon. This was a real killer for me because I really like watermelon. And watermelon is mostly water, so one would think that that would be all right. But it's actually very high in sugar content. So be cautious with watermelon. Blackberries are another one, although blueberries seem to be okay. All dried fruits are very high in sugars and FODMAPs, which make them, the higher the sugar content and the types of sugar, the harder it is to digest, the more gas, bloating, pressure, belching, indigestion type symptoms that you have, which, as you know, can lead to diarrhea, constipation, or actually even vomiting. Apples are another thing which are difficult. I have found that in some of the fruits, though, if you remove the skin, which I know is where the vitamins and the minerals are, and people are going to say, okay, well, you know, you're eliminating the good part of the fruit. However, if you want to be able to enjoy it and you don't want it to make you sick in the long run, if you can take the skin off or try to eat around seeds, so to speak, probably it's going to be better for you. I've mentioned tomatoes. Remember, tomatoes are a fruit. So once again, I generally would suggest you skin those. Canned tomatoes seem to be easier to tolerate. Moving on to nuts. I would think, well, nuts are difficult to digest anyway, so they might all be bad. And unfortunately, that's mostly true. But some ones to be really cautious with are pistachios, cashews, hazelnut, almonds. Almond milk seems to be a little lower on the FODMAP chain, so maybe a little easier to digest, but still be cautious. And there's such a trend with not only nut butters now, but nut milks. As you're seeing in your grocery stores, you're seeing the almond milks, the soy milks, the cashew milks, the oatmeal milks, or oat milks, I should say. So be cautious with those nuts. Actually, peanuts, like Brazil nuts, macadamias, those seem to be better tolerated. Once again, less sugars involved. Dairy. Dairy is difficult because we've got the lactose, which is a more known milk sugar component. So pretty much all dairy is not so good. If you can find like a lactose-free dairy product, That is much better, much less sugar, so it should be more tolerated. Once again, just be cautious with that. Definitely be cautious in general with any animal type of milk, cow milk, goat milk, sheep milk. Not only if you're drinking it, or even in your cheeses, be cautious with that. Brie, camembert, those type of things. Cream cheese are all really high in FODMAP content. Some vegetables to be cautious with. Probably number one, and not just because it's a very high FODMAP food, but even number one, considering extremely difficult to digest, produces a lot of stomach problems in general, and also is treated with chemicals. Just predominantly would be corn. And this was bad news to me too, because I love corn and things made with corn, but corn is definitely bad news. Corn is probably the worst vegetable out there for all of those reasons. Extremely high in FODMAP content. Another vegetable that is high would be onions, garlic, mushrooms, beans, including pinto, kidney, chili beans, any kind of beans. Refried beans are all kind of bad news. I had mentioned obviously the garlic and onion. Certain types of cabbage you have to be cautious with, cauliflower, broccoli. And once again, remember, some people are going to be able to do okay with this. Some people are absolutely not going to do it at all. Brussels sprouts are in that cabbage family, so kind of be cautious with that as well. And last but not least, I wanted to include sweeteners, such as honey. You need to eat honey in small amounts. And artificial sweeteners. There are so many artificial sweeteners that are even hidden sometimes in places that we wouldn't even think. I mean, we're all familiar with sugarless candy, sugarless gum, but sweeteners can be in a lot of different things. Obviously, anything labeled as diabetic or low sugar, but there are sweeteners in your yogurts. There can be sweeteners in bread. There can be sweeteners in any type of bakery item, that may not necessarily be just sugar. So be cautious and look for things like xanthan gum, guar gums. Those things in addition are thickeners that, even though they're considered natural and non-GMO, but they are a fermentable carbohydrate. So with that in mind, be cognizant that, even though you might be thinking, well, I've eliminated all these other foods, why is this still bothering me? Just out of curiosity, check the label and see if it does have xanthan gum or guar gum in it, and that may be to blame. Also, I know some people are really, really sensitive to like whey proteins, and that I've mentioned this before when I was talking about protein supplements and protein bars. That whey protein and isolate and casein and things can also be really difficult to digest and break down, even though they may not technically be considered a high FODMAP type food. So just wrapping up, I know that's a lot of information in a short period of time, and lots of, unfortunately, things that might really mess you up. But I'll tell you what, seriously, I have done a lot of experimenting with this and have eliminated some things. And for me, this has probably made the most significant benefit that I've noticed beyond a lot of the other things that I've done. So I hope that this is informative for you. Once again, do your research, investigate, do a food journal. If you are still having some serious concerns and problems, definitely consult your medical professional. Run all this by them. Let them know what you're thinking. And I wish the best for you and hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.